Can you imagine if you were to read a story about politicians who didn't show up for an important debate about a housing crisis? No one was there for the vote when it came to raising nurses' wages, but then you looked and then the next day they had some decisions to make on how long the bar is open at Parliament and what the prices of a pint is at their bar and what the travel expenses are for politicians, and all of them showed up for that. None of them for the important decisions, but all of them showed up for these other decisions to do with parking or bar or travel expenses. Would you be surprised if I told you that story? Probably not particularly surprised. I think we have a certain cynicism when it comes to politicians that we think, yeah, I can picture that, self-serving rather than caring about things that matter. Or maybe you recently have had the experience of knowing there's some important news that's going on in the world, some big, really important things, and you get the newspaper and you want to read about the important news, but on the front page all there is news about Prince Harry and Meghan and all their feuds with the royal family, or even worse, the front few pages are filled with news about celebrities, the Kardashians or whatever else is in the news at the moment. You think, I want the important news. How can this stuff make the front page? How do you feel when that experience happens? Or when you're in your own life maybe, when you see someone who is all focused about silly little things and doesn't care about big important things. It's a frustrating experience, isn't it? It's a sad experience. You think, why do you care about that little thing and not this thing that matters? Well, I want you to hold on to that thought, okay? Pause. I'm not going to jump straight into thinking about that, but I want you to hold on to that feeling of frustration when someone cares about little unimportant things, but they don't care about things that really matter. Now today we're going to read from the parable of the prodigal son. This parable is, in my opinion, the best one for helping us understand the richness of God's love for us. Because as good as the two parables that Wally read for us, the lost sheep and the lost coin, they're helpful, but this one is about people. And so I think in this story that Jesus told, we get such a rich picture of God's love poured out in the gospel story. It's a story of people, not sheep or coins. So let's have a look at it. Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11. And Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the youngest son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead. Your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." And so we see in this that the story here, because it's a story of human relationships, it kind of plays out the gospel. And so the first thing is, I think it gives us a really clear and insightful picture of what sin is like. It gives us a picture of what sin is like because from the word go, in verse 12, the younger son comes to his father and he says to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." He says to his father, "Give me my inheritance." Now, when do you normally get your inheritance? After father dies. So in effect, what this son is saying to his father is, "I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead because I don't want you, I want your things. I don't want you, I want your things." And that, my friends, is a perfect little snapshot of what sin is like. Sin is saying to God, "We want the kingdom, but we don't want you as king. We want all the blessings that this world has, all the good things in this world. We just don't want to answer to you, God. We don't want you to be the boss." And so from the very word go, when sin first comes into the story of this world in the Garden of Eden, it's a story of saying, "I want to be on the throne. I want to be in charge of myself. I want everything that's coming to me, God. Give me it all, but just not you." And that is what all sin says. All sin says, "I want the good things, but I don't want you to be boss. I don't want you to be the king." And so it gives us this snapshot of that from the word go, a wicked attitude. We can see it in this story when it's put as a son going to their father and saying, "I wish you were dead." That is a horrible thing to say. But every time we choose to take God's blessings without submitting to him as our Lord, that is in effect what we are saying to our Heavenly Father. We want the kingdom, all the blessings, we just don't want you as king. And secondly, the picture that's given of sin is one of emptiness and false promise. I suspect this younger son, before he even got to having nothing, could recognize that he had made a mistake. It wasn't like the pleasures that he filled his life with were doing anything to actually fill him up. The picture is of a slowly being used up and depleted, of starting with much, the blessing from the Father, but it just, as he went and squandered it, he doesn't find joy in that. It's an emptiness, it's a hollowness, it's a lie that this world says constantly when it comes to sin. Do this and you will be happy. Chase after this and you will be fulfilled. Follow your heart and follow your dreams and fill your life with more and forget about God. And if you do that, you will be filled and happy and content. But friends, as we see in this story, it is a lie. This world offers a false promise of being filled up. Instead, there's an emptiness. There's a depletedness. There's a desperation that comes. And so we see it ending with him longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate. No one giving him anything. He has spent everything. It is famine and he is empty. And that is what sin is like. C.S. Lewis, the famous author who wrote the Narnia stories, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, he also wrote much about Christianity. And he says this about our state before God. Here's a quote from C.S. Lewis. "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. We are like ignorant children who want to go on making mud pies in a slum because we cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea." The picture of sin here is of being like children playing with mud pies in the gutter rather than going to the holiday at the sea. What Christ offers is so much more. And so it gives us a realistic picture of sin. It's saying, I wish you were dead to God, and it has a false promise, an emptiness to it. Secondly, we see as the son, I love the way he analyzes. This is a real analytical son. He weighs up his situation. He says, well, even the servants back home do better than I am. So he does a bit of thinking here, and he's thinking, maybe, and you can tell he's practiced his little speech, hasn't he, before he gets to the father, because he says it. Even though the father interrupts him, he still says his little speech that he's practiced. Maybe then, if I know my father and how much provision is, even the servants are better fed than I am. So he does his calculations, he does his analysing, he has a bit of a gathering of all the information, the data, and he comes up with a plan. But he's missing one really important piece of data. And that piece of information that he's missing as he makes his plans is this: the nature of God's heart, the nature of his Father's heart, what his Father's heart is like. We see that it is a heart that is full of love, full of compassion, full of mercy, ready to forgive. And the son can't even imagine that. He knows he has blown it. He knows he has gone so far wrong. Surely not. Surely his father cannot forgive him. I wonder how his analysis of what happens as the father runs to him would have gone. I wonder, as he saw his father running, he had a moment of thinking, what is going on here? What is happening? And his little computer started ticking in his mind again, and he's trying to piece together the information of what's happening. And maybe we should do that. Maybe we should ask the question that he would have asked: is he ignorant of my sin? Is that why we can come back to God? Because God actually doesn't know just how bad you really are. Is that your hope? That you go back to God and he'll have you come to him because he doesn't know just how wicked your thoughts have been. He hasn't seen just how bad your actions and failings are. And maybe that's your hope as you come into church, that you get dressed up on a Sunday, you put your Sunday best on, you put your big, brave, happy, righteous face on, and everyone looks at you and they think, what a fine, upstanding citizen of Ballina this person is. And that's your attitude to God. You think, if I can just pretend I've got it all together, if I can hide away my darkest secrets and sins, then maybe he'll have me. But is that what happened with the son here? No. Do you remember what the first sin was? It wasn't the going off and squandering the wealth. He'd already done the sin before that. That just kind of piled upon it. What was the first sin? It was to say, I wish you were dead. I want my money. And the father was there for that. He knew about that. That was the shameful sin. That was the worst of them all. The rest pale into insignificance compared to the one that said, I reject you, Father. I want nothing to do with you. And so the father knew. He knew the sin. There was nothing hidden. It wasn't an ignorance of the sin. The father knew the sin. So that's not why he runs to him. It's not because he doesn't know. Maybe as his brain keeps ticking, he thinks, maybe I thought my sin was really bad, but it's not as bad as I thought it was. And so that's why the father's having me back. I thought I'd ruined it, but hey, maybe it wasn't so bad after all. When Brooke and I were dating, she came to me and she said, David, I've done something really, really bad. She knows where this story's going, so she's smiling right now. And I panicked, I'm thinking, I was worried. Like, I felt sick. I'm thinking, what is she? Just tell me, please tell me, what have you done? I'm thinking it was something awful for her to feel like the seriousness with which she said, oh, you're going to hate me. I've done something really, really bad. So my mind's just going to all these possibilities of what it could be. And then she tells me the cassette tape. You young'uns don't know what a cassette tape is. There used to be, instead of just listening to music on your phone, there used to be this tape, and you could record songs that played on the radio onto this tape, and you'd wind it back with a pencil when you needed to. Well, I had taped in Australia. There was this list of songs, the best songs of the year that would be played on the radio all together, the hottest 100 they called it, and I'd got my tape ready and I'd taped all the hottest 100 and I'd lent my tape to Brooke, and she'd accidentally recorded over some of it. Tori Amos's song Cornflake Girl now has a very funny memory for us because that was the song she accidentally recorded over. Can you imagine when she told me that, my response? Is that all? That was what I said, because I just had all this fear of what could you have possibly done, and she thought it was the worst thing ever, and then she tells me it was taped over some song. I was like, oh, is that all? And maybe that's what the son thinks is going to happen with the father. I thought all this thing I did was really bad and I'd ruined it, but the father doesn't really mind so much. And maybe that's our attitude when it comes to God. We think I can go back to him because, you know what, he's okay with what I've done. He's going to accept me as I am. He's okay with my failings because they're not that bad. But that's not what's going on here. What the son has done is wicked. The father's name is shame is brought on his name. He has cut off his relationship with his father. He has said, I don't want you in my life. The father doesn't shrug at that and go, you know what, boys will be boys, that's okay. The father knows the utter wickedness of his deeds, and he doesn't downplay them, and he doesn't say, sure, I can tape Cornflake Girl another time. He doesn't play it down. He knows the wickedness of his son's deeds. And so at this point, it's not because dad doesn't know, and it's not because dad doesn't care. You can picture his little analytical computer would start whirring and smoke is pouring out of it. Does not compute. This doesn't make sense. Why is dad running towards me and hugging me? He knows what I've done and he's offended by what I've done. And yet he's running towards me with his arms out. And the answer we see is in verse 24. As he runs, as he sees him, in verse 24, we're told that he is filled with compassion. And verse 24 tells us, for this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and found. And they began to celebrate. The father's heart is filled with compassion because his son who was lost has returned in repentance. He who was gone and was dead is now alive, and the Father loves that. That is his favourite story. Now, there's two questions that Jesus addresses in this chapter. The first we see in verses 1 to 3, they're hinted at. When Wally read for us at the start, the situation that he told these stories, all three stories, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son, give a hint of what they're about in verse 1 to 3. Let me read it. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes, that is the religious elite, the very religious people, they grumbled, saying, this man, Jesus, he receives sinners and eats with them. They're grumbling about that, right? That's the context. And so that's why Jesus told the three parables. So the first question that Jesus is answering is this. Why did Jesus eat with sinners? And the answer, we've just seen it. The reason Jesus ate with sinners was because those who were lost have been found. My children who were far off, they've come to me. Of course I will eat with them. This is great, says Jesus. There's a joy. He's not just putting up with them. He's not doing the, oh, this is icky and I don't like this situation, but I'll just put up with them. He's delighted to have these sinners come and eat with him because those who were lost are found. So that's the first question. We've seen the answer. They were lost, they are found. His heart is filled with compassion. His heart is filled with joy, just like when a lost sheep or a lost coin is found. So that's the first question. The second question is this. Why didn't the religious people eat with the sinners? So he asked the question, why do I eat with them? And he says, because lost people who are found, that's a great reason for celebration. But now the question gets turned around onto them. This is the bit I think we often miss in this story. It's asking the question, why don't you religious people eat with the sinners? Why do you grumble and get cranky that God would love those people who have messed up so badly? Why do you keep your distance from those who have got it wrong and who are messy and are sin-stained? Why do you keep away from them? And we see that in the older son's story, don't we? As great as the news is that the younger son comes back, how does the older son respond? He's out in the field. He doesn't come running. He's like, what is going on here? You what? That guy? That one? I know what he's done. Don't you know? Are you so stupid? And so he's angry. Verse 28. He was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I've served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. He is angry. And Jesus is asking the question, why do you feel that way about lost people being saved? Why do you get annoyed at that? Why did the religious Jews, why did they not join him and eat with these sinners? And the answer is a sad one. See, just as Jesus' heart is exposed to be full of compassion and joy at lost people being saved, Jesus' heart swells up with joy when he sees lost people returning to him. That's the heart we see there. So too are the religious people's hearts exposed. And this is what is exposed. Jesus says to them, through these three parables, he says, you celebrate when a lost sheep is found. You celebrate when a coin is found. But when a lost son is found, you get angry. Do you see the hypocrisy? They care about the little things being found, but the greatest reason for celebration is a lost person coming back to God. And he says, you don't celebrate that. You're bitter about that. You've forgotten that you were saved by grace. And so you're angry when you see others saved by grace. This cuts us to the heart, doesn't it? It doesn't take long to be sitting in a Christian context in church and to start forgetting that you were saved by God's grace, that you needed forgiveness, that you had sinned that same sin. I hate you, God. I wish you weren't there. Maybe you didn't say it like that, but maybe your actions displayed exactly that. I want everything good, but I don't want you. You forget that it was God stepping in to save you through Jesus. And so when you forget that, you start to think, not him, not them. Oh, please, Lord, don't bring that person to church. They're too messy. There's too much. Oh, they're an embarrassment. If people in town heard about them coming to our church, all the rumours would go out there and people would wonder, what kind of church is that? And then they might start asking, what kind of person am I that I would sit with them in a Bible study group or that I would have them to my house? And so we start acting like these Pharisees, and we might celebrate a lost coin being found. I celebrated a lost coat. Do you remember I asked you all where my coat had gone? And yes, I found my coat. What a celebration. How foolish I would be if I stopped celebrating God's grace as lost people are found. So let me encourage you, 2 applications from this text today. The first is this: see sin for what it is and run back to Jesus. See God for who he is. See sin as being an empty promise that will not fulfill you. And now, maybe you are the prodigal right now. Maybe you know in your heart, maybe others don't know it. They all think you're very respectable and you're all sorted with God. But maybe right now you know, I am far off. I am in my sin. I am trapped in it, and it's time for me to stop and run back to God through Jesus now. So turn away from sin's empty, hollow promises and come home to God's full, loving embrace. Let me say that again. Turn away from sin's empty promises. Come back to God's full embrace through Jesus. That's why he came, to seek and save the lost. That's the first application. The second is to those who are more like the older brother. And I say this to you: remember that you too were saved by grace. God doesn't say, yeah, you're good because of who you are. You needed Jesus too. Remember that you were saved by grace. Remember, and join in the party as others who are far off, who are still entangled in sin and messy lives. And we prayed 2 weeks ago, Lord, please bring messy people to our church. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for people to come in who have still got problems because of the sins and mistakes they've made, and we need to help them sort those problems out, and people are going to still struggle with things? Are you ready for messy people to come? And are you going to celebrate that? Join in the party that others like you were lost and are found. Let's pray.